A man stood quietly in front of his home, changing his Wi-Fi password. But within minutes, flashing lights filled the street. A neighbor had called 911, accusing him of suspicious activity. What followed wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the unraveling of a hidden network, buried secrets, and a powerful lesson about judgment, trust, and the unseen dangers in our own backyards. This is the story of the invisible network. Jamal Rivers stood in the front yard of his newly purchased home in Oak Ridge, a picturesque neighborhood known for its autumn-colored trees and trimmed white fences. A 32-year-old cybersecurity analyst, Jamal had recently left the chaos of city life in search of peace. Oak Ridge, with its clean sidewalks and slow-moving pace, seemed perfect. That Saturday afternoon, Jamal decided to finally fix the spotty Wi-Fi he'd been dealing with all week. Zoom calls kept freezing, music buffered mid-song. Something felt off. Using his phone, he logged into the router's admin panel to inspect the connections. That's when he saw it, a device listed as Oak Ridge Sentinel. Not a default name, not a random string of letters. Someone had deliberately named it. Jamal lived alone. He didn't lend out his password. That device shouldn't be there. Annoyed, he kicked it off the network and began updating his password settings. For better signal, he stepped outside, standing in the yard with his phone, tapping quickly. From across the street, behind laced curtains, Nora Caldwell, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, watched him. To her, a young black man standing outside with a glowing device wasn't just adjusting his settings. He was doing something suspicious, and she had no idea the call she was about to make would set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Oak Ridge. Nora Caldwell, 68, had lived in Oak Ridge longer than most of the houses had existed. A widow with no children, her days were mostly filled with gardening, tea brewing, and most of all, watching. From her kitchen window, she monitored everything: the comings and goings of delivery trucks, which kids skipped school, and who failed to rake their leaves. To Nora, change was never welcome. She believed that Oak Ridge had a certain charm, a standard, and Jamal, with his quiet demeanor and tech gadgets, didn't fit that image. He didn't attend community potlucks. He didn't wave when neighbors passed. He kept to himself, and that was reason enough for her to suspect something was wrong. That afternoon, seeing him outside with his phone, eyes locked on the screen, fingers moving fast, her imagination ran wild. Was he recording people? Hacking into something? Spying? Acting on instinct, she grabbed her landline and dialed 911. "Yes, hello," she said urgently. "There's a suspicious man across the street. He's outside with some kind of electronic device. He's been standing there for 10 minutes, just doing something strange." When the dispatcher asked for details, Nora had nothing concrete to offer. Only, "I just know something's wrong." What she didn't know, however, was that the real danger wasn't the man with the phone. It was something much closer to home. Jamal had just finished entering the new Wi-Fi password when he heard the sound. Sirens. At first, he assumed they were passing through, but as the red and blue lights reflected off his windows, a chill ran down his spine. Two squad cars pulled up directly in front of his house. From one vehicle stepped Lieutenant Dean Rourke, a tall, gruff-looking officer with eyes that missed nothing. From the other came Officer Lynn Tran, a younger, sharper presence who carried herself with the precision of someone who knew exactly how fast things could go wrong. Jamal didn't move. He stood still, phone at his side, already knowing where this was headed. Rourke stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to speak volumes. "Sir, we received a call about some suspicious activity. Can you tell us what you're doing?" Jamal blinked. "I'm changing my Wi-Fi password," he replied flatly, voice calm but tinged with disbelief. Before more could be said, a voice rang out from across the street. "He's lying!" It was Nora Caldwell, standing firmly on her porch like she was captain of the neighborhood watch. "He's always out there poking around, always on his phone. Now he's out here for 15 minutes looking around like he's spying." Jamal stared at her, deadpan. "I was logging into my router settings." Apparently, in Oak Ridge, that was enough to make someone a suspect. Lieutenant Rourke glanced at Officer Tran, both visibly skeptical but professional. Sir, Rourke said, trying to de-escalate, would you mind showing us what you were doing? Just to clear things up. Jamal sighed. He didn't owe them anything, but he also didn't want this escalating further. Fine. He invited them inside and pulled up the router settings on his laptop. Here, he said, pointing at the device list. See that one? Oak Ridge Sentinel. I have no idea what that is, but it's been connected to my network all week. Tran leaned in, brows furrowed. That's a manually named device. And the connection logs. Jamal opened another tab, showing timestamps. It's been accessing the network nonstop, including at 2 a.m. when I was asleep. Could just be someone leeching off your signal, Rourke said cautiously. I thought so too, Jamal replied, until I checked which ports it was using. He clicked again, and this time the display changed. Live access logs from his security cameras. What you're looking at, he said slowly, is proof that someone's been watching me. From the inside. The room went cold, and then Officer Tran noticed something else. Footage that wasn't from Jamal's house. It was from another home in the neighborhood. The scope of the violation had just changed. Officer Tran leaned closer, eyes scanning the screen with growing concern. The footage clearly wasn't from Jamal's home. It showed a dim hallway, then a bright kitchen with floral wallpaper. And finally, a familiar space, Nora Caldwell's kitchen. From behind them, Nora gasped. That's my house! Jamal's jaw tightened. I didn't access this. The intruder used my network as a gateway. Someone hacked my router and used it as a launchpad to spy. Not just on me, but on other homes, including yours. Lieutenant Rourke straightened, suddenly grave. This isn't just unauthorized network access anymore. This is a digital surveillance operation. He stepped outside and called for cybercrime support. Meanwhile, Jamal continued tracing the source. This setup isn't random, he muttered. It's a man-in-the-middle attack. Someone set up a fake Wi-Fi network with a familiar name. When neighbors' devices auto-connected, the hacker got access to their cameras and smart devices. Nora's hands trembled. You mean someone's been watching me? Your whole routine, Jamal said flatly. Probably for weeks. Officer Tran folded her arms. Question is, who? Jamal stared at the IP trace on his screen. We're about to find out. Because the data wasn't going to some anonymous server overseas. It was going to an address, right there in Oak Ridge. The digital breadcrumbs led straight to an IP address just 4 houses down. Jamal cross-referenced signal strength and timestamps using the router's diagnostic tools. Within minutes, a match. Rourke's expression darkened. You recognize the house? Jamal hesitated. Yeah, it belongs to Nora's niece, Adrian. She moved in with her teenage son a few months ago. Quiet kid. Name's Kyle. Kyle Caldwell. Nora's face went pale. Kyle? That's impossible, she whispered. He barely leaves his room. He's just a gamer. Gamers often know more about network infrastructure than professionals, Jamal replied. And this isn't amateur-level snooping. The 3 of them walked toward Adrian's house. Nora trailed behind like a ghost. Her knees weak, mind spinning. Could it be true? Jamal didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. When they reached the porch, Rourke knocked firmly. Adrian opened the door, surprised. Is something wrong? We need to speak with your son, Rourke said calmly. Is he home? Adrian's brows knit together. Yeah, but no explanations yet, Officer Tran interrupted. Please take us to him. As they entered the hallway, the silence was thick. The tension crackled like static in the air. Behind a closed door, the sound of rapid typing stopped. Kyle already knew. They were coming. Rourke knocked. Kyle Caldwell, this is the police. We need to speak with you. No answer. Then came the scrape of a chair, followed by hesitant footsteps. The door creaked open to reveal Kyle, a wiry 17-year-old with tousled hair and anxious eyes. He looked at the officers, then at his great-aunt Nora. What's going on? We have reason to believe your computer has been involved in unauthorized access of private home networks in this neighborhood, Rourke said evenly. We'd like to ask a few questions. Kyle's hands fidgeted. I didn't do anything wrong. You wouldn't mind if we looked at your laptop then? Kyle hesitated. You need a warrant, right? We'll get one, Officer Tran replied coolly. But this is your opportunity to be honest. He looked at Nora. Her face said it all. Heartbreak, betrayal, disbelief. I I didn't mean for it to get this far, he admitted. I just wanted to see if I could trick the system. It was a challenge, just tech stuff. Then I saw the security feeds. And I got curious. Tran's voice turned sharp. Curious? Or addicted? Kyle looked down ashamed. How many houses? Rourke asked. Kyle's voice barely came out. I I don't know. Maybe 10. Maybe more. Nora staggered back, covering her mouth. Her world was falling apart. Officer Tran calmly retrieved her handcuffs. Kyle Caldwell, you are under arrest for unauthorized access to computer networks, unlawful surveillance, in violation of digital privacy laws. Kyle didn't resist. As she secured the cuffs around his wrists, he kept his head down, eyes burning. I swear, he muttered, I didn't hurt anyone. That's not your call to make, Rourke said. You invaded their lives. Jamal stood outside the door, watching quietly. Nora turned to him, ashamed beyond words. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was wrong. So wrong. Jamal's face was unreadable. He wasn't interested in apologies. I don't need sorry, he said, voice low. I need better. As Kyle was led out of the house in cuffs, neighbors began peeking out their doors and windows. A collective unease settled over the street. Not because a teenager had been arrested, but because they all realized how easy it had been to misjudge someone innocent and ignore someone dangerous under their own roof. Nora watched the squad car drive away, her hands shaking. She hadn't just called the police on the wrong man. She'd been living with the right one all along, and now she couldn't unsee it. News of the arrest traveled fast. The story made it to local stations. Teen behind Oak Ridge Wi-Fi spy network apprehended. Neighbors who had once exchanged smiles at bake sales now viewed each other with caution. Some realized they too had seen signs, devices acting strange, cameras blinking on their own, but had ignored them. Jamal, on the other hand, didn't seek credit. He declined interviews, refused public recognition. Instead, he began helping affected neighbors secure their networks, installing firewalls, teaching them about spoofing and fake access points. Ironically, the man once viewed as an outsider had now become Oak Ridge's digital protector. At the local community center, Nora approached him again. I know I was wrong, she said, voice softer this time, but I want to help now, however I can. Jamal looked at her. For the first time, he didn't see suspicion in her eyes. He saw sincerity. You can start, he said, by making sure people hear what really happened. Nora nodded, eyes wet. Because it wasn't just a digital breach. It was a breach of character, of assumptions, of humanity. And only by facing that truth could they begin to rebuild. Not just firewalls, but trust. Weeks passed. Jamal spoke at Oak Ridge's first cyber awareness night. What began as a small meeting turned into a packed event. Residents came not just for tech advice, but for reflection. Standing at the podium, Jamal didn't talk about ports or IP masking first. He talked about judgment. I was profiled because I stood in my yard with a phone, he said, calm but firm. I was seen as a threat before anyone asked me a question. He paused. But what if I hadn't known how to track that device? What if I didn't have the tech skills to prove my innocence? What if I was just another face, wrongly accused and forgotten? The room was quiet. Nora sat in the front row, nodding slowly. Jamal continued. Kyle made a mistake, a big one. But he didn't create the system that allowed him to thrive in the shadows. That system belongs to all of us. Our habits, our assumptions, our silence. As he stepped down from the stage, the applause was not thunderous. It was solemn, respectful, genuine. And in that quiet acknowledgement, Jamal knew the real network was no longer invisible. It had just begun to connect. Not long after the community event, Jamal received a message in his inbox from an unfamiliar contact, District Councilwoman Brielle Carter. She had watched a recording of his speech and was impressed not only by his technical skills, but by his composure. We need voices like yours, she said during their first meeting. Voices grounded in experience, not theory. Would you consider serving as an advisor to our digital safety initiative? Jamal was hesitant. Politics had never appealed to him. Too much spin, not enough substance. But then he remembered the look on Nora's face, the fear in the neighbor's eyes, and the power of being heard. I'll do it, he said, but only if it means real change, not just PR. She nodded. That's exactly what I'm looking for. What began as a simple act of self-defense, changing a Wi-Fi password, had now turned into something much bigger. Jamal wasn't just securing networks anymore. He was beginning to secure minds. He would speak at schools, assist with audits of public buildings, even help draft policies to prevent surveillance-based tech crimes. And the best part? He wasn't doing it to prove himself. He was doing it so others wouldn't have to. Meanwhile, Kyle Caldwell sat in juvenile detention, awaiting his court date. He wasn't a hardened criminal, just a teenager with skills and no direction. During his first week, he barely spoke. But as the news story faded from headlines and life went on outside, Kyle began reflecting. His mother, Adrienne, visited weekly. Each time, her words carried more weight, her voice more sadness. "You're smarter than this," she said. "But being smart isn't enough if you don't respect other people's boundaries." Kyle had always felt invisible, isolated. His digital mastery gave him a sense of control, power in a world where he felt like nothing. But now, with everything stripped away, he was just Kyle again, a boy who had seen too much and hurt too many. Then came a letter from Jamal. It wasn't angry. It wasn't judgmental. It was simple. Curiosity isn't a crime, but crossing lines is. You're not beyond redemption. If you ever want to use your skills the right way, start with owning the damage, then build something better. Kyle read it again and again. It was the first time he'd felt someone actually saw him, not as a threat, not as a monster, but as someone worth saving. The events in Oak Ridge triggered a ripple effect. Local tech businesses began offering free cybersecurity workshops. The library upgraded its firewall. Parents started asking their kids about Wi-Fi settings, not to accuse, but to understand. And most surprising of all, Nora Caldwell began hosting weekly cyber circles in her living room. With Jamal's help, she learned how to use encryption, recognize fake networks, and explain two-factor authentication in plain English. The same woman who once called 911 on Jamal now handed out brochures titled, "What to Do Before You Judge." One day, a teenage girl named Ava asked Nora, "Why do you care so much now?" Nora didn't flinch. "Because I made the kind of mistake I thought only other people made," she said. "And because next time, I want to be the neighbor who asks, not assumes." The room nodded. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, but it can be reconstructed, like a broken network, with the right tools, patience, and open hearts. Oak Ridge was learning that, one conversation at a time. As Jamal continued his advisory work, he began noticing patterns in reports from other neighborhoods. Similar devices, similar surveillance, similar names: Sentinel, Guardian, Overwatch. He pulled up a map and overlaid the incidents. They weren't isolated. Someone or some network was deploying these harmless pranks in wealthy neighborhoods across the state. But while Kyle's setup had been small and personal, these others were organized. The signals were stronger, encrypted deeper, and designed to hide their origin. Jamal brought this to Councilwoman Carter. "I think what happened here was just a test run." She frowned. "For what?" He didn't answer right away, but in his mind he saw the pattern clearly. Data harvesting, behavioral mapping, facial recognition from doorbell cameras, and all of it under the radar. If Kyle had stumbled into the darkness by mistake, someone else was walking in it on purpose. And Jamal knew he couldn't face this alone. It was time to build his own network, one that didn't watch in silence, but acted in defense of the invisible. One quiet morning, Jamal received a surprising email. The subject line, "Request for mentorship." It was from Kyle. The message was clumsy but sincere. He'd completed a rehabilitation program, was released early for good behavior, and had enrolled in a community tech program. He asked for a meeting, just to talk. Jamal didn't reply immediately. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but then he thought about his own journey, about how easy it was to be misunderstood, misjudged, discarded. Maybe Kyle didn't deserve a second chance. But maybe that wasn't the point. They met at a coffee shop downtown. Kyle looked thinner, older somehow, but his eyes were clear. "I messed up," he said right away. "But I want to make something right." Jamal sat back watching him. "Then prove it. Help me stop what's coming." Kyle blinked. "Coming?" Jamal pulled out his tablet, showing Kyle the growing network of strange signals, the pattern of device names. "This wasn't just you. Someone else is doing this at scale." Kyle leaned in, stunned. And just like that, the student became the shield. With Councilwoman Carter's help, Jamal secured limited funding to establish a pilot initiative. Project Sentinel. Its mission? Track, disrupt, and expose illegal surveillance networks operating in suburban communities. And Kyle? He became one of its first recruits. Jamal made it clear, this wasn't forgiveness. It was responsibility. Kyle worked harder than anyone. He understood how the systems worked, and more importantly, how people got lured into using them. They partnered with schools to teach ethical hacking, created neighborhood tech squads to offer support, and within 6 months, they'd identified 7 active fake networks across the region. Each time, the story was the same. "I thought it was just Wi-Fi." Jamal's message spread. Invisibility isn't a shield. It's a warning. He didn't just make Oak Ridge safer. He made others realize the world they live in wasn't as secure or as private as they assumed. And the best defense was awareness. At a regional cybersecurity summit, Jamal was asked to deliver the keynote. He brought Kyle with him, but he also invited Nora Caldwell, who initially hesitated. "What would I say?" "Just the truth," Jamal answered. So Nora stood before a crowd of experts, educators, and leaders. "I once thought I was protecting my neighborhood by calling the police on someone who didn't look right," she began. The room held its breath. "I wasn't protecting anyone. I was exposing my own fear. And if we don't confront that fear, all the tech in the world won't keep us safe." Her words landed, because they were real. And in that moment, the woman once blinded by bias became a beacon of humility. Sometimes it's not the firewalls that need patching. It's the hearts. Months later, on a quiet walk through Oak Ridge, Jamal saw something unexpected. A young boy, no older than 12, standing outside his house with a tablet, clearly struggling. Jamal approached gently. "Hey, need help?" The boy looked up, startled, then nodded. "My Wi-Fi's down, and my mom's gonna kill me if I mess it up more." Jamal smiled. "Let's take a look." 15 minutes later, the boy's internet was back. He thanked Jamal and added, "You're the guy who stopped the hackers, right?" Jamal shrugged. "I guess you could say that." As the boy ran off, Jamal stood in the golden light of the afternoon, realizing something. It wasn't about how people saw him anymore. It was about what they trusted him to do. He didn't change Oak Ridge's minds by yelling. He changed them by showing up, again and again, with knowledge, with strength, with patience. Eventually, Project Sentinel traced the route of the multi-neighborhood surveillance network to a shadow tech company based in Miami. What they found was shocking. The data harvested wasn't just used for ads. It was being sold to political operatives, foreign firms, and private intelligence outfits. Councilwoman Carter pushed for federal hearings. Jamal testified. And Kyle, he provided insight only a former infiltrator could. The fallout was massive. The company folded. Executives were indicted. And most importantly, new legislation passed to make digital surveillance without consent a felony offense. Oak Ridge had sparked a national reckoning, and the man once treated like an outsider had become one of its loudest, most trusted defenders. Jamal didn't seek awards. He didn't want applause. He just wanted peace. And finally, he had it. 1 year later, Jamal took a quiet stroll down Oak Ridge Lane. Where once there had been suspicion and silence, now there were waves, nods, and children riding bikes. A neighborhood changed, not perfectly, but intentionally. He passed Nora's house. She was on her porch sipping tea. She raised her glass slightly, a silent salute. Kyle rode by on a bike, laptop in his backpack, on his way to teach a free coding class. And as Jamal reached his front gate, he looked up at the sky. A lot had happened, but this was no longer the end of the story. It was a beginning. The invisible network had been exposed, and in its place, a stronger one was built, made of trust, knowledge, and the courage to speak when it mattered most. In a world where technology connects us in seconds, it also gives us new ways to misunderstand, judge, and harm each other, often without even realizing it. But behind every device, every network, is a human being with fears, assumptions, hopes, and choices. This story isn't just about Wi-Fi, cameras, or hacking. It's about how easy it is to point fingers at the wrong person. It's about how bias, unspoken and unchecked, can turn a neighbor into a suspect. But it's also about the power of redemption, growth, and standing up. Not with anger, but with action. Jamal didn't respond to prejudice with rage. He responded with truth, knowledge, and resilience. Nora faced her own assumptions and chose to change. And Kyle, once lost in the shadows of digital curiosity, found a new path in the light. Because real security isn't just about firewalls, it's about the people who build them and the courage to face what's behind them. We all live in invisible networks of trust, fear, responsibility, and community. The question is, will we protect them or let them fall apart?